All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Mutasim Huda. Today I'm going to be discussing brain-based learning and its influence on differentiated instruction and engagement. So before I go there, just a little bit about myself. I'm a middle school teacher. I've been teaching for 7.5 years in the school district of East Orange, which is a neighborhood outside of Newark, New Jersey. Um, I teach social studies, history, and other content that's related to that, including geography, economics, and things of that sort. I enjoy what I do, mainly um, mainly because of the students and the connections and the relationships that I developed. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And that's pretty much it about myself. All right, so here we go. We're going to start with this brief overview on the topics that are presented. So, brain-based learning. I have it here described as a simple yet diverse approach to teaching and learning. And then, obviously, we want to use scientific research and we want to use as much evidence to back the claiming of what we're talking about. So, brain-based learning is the the concept of using research on the brain, how it processes information, how it stores information, and how it interacts with different stimuli, different experiences, and then kind of implement that into teaching and learning and see how the two unfold as they become married together. All right, so the emphasis here is studying the brain and studying the behavior and the actions of humans in order to make the education process smoother. So as you see here, understanding how the brain deals with information will ultimately guide instruction, guide learning, guide developing curriculum, guide response to intervention, and things of that sort. So as we strive and we push to understand the human mind better and the multiverse of the human mind, because obviously all brains are not the same, we can kind of get better at facilitating instruction and helping develop optimal learners. Moving on. So one of the first concepts that are dealt with in brain-based learning is the idea of differentiation. Differentiation is this concept that views learning from different angles, right? And obviously, the root word of differentiation is different, so we can understand from the bat that it has to do with multiple things and alternative concepts. So, as educators, we want to ask ourselves, how can we crack the code in the child's mind? And it's not just child, but adolescents and learners in general. We want to be able to figure out how our students learn. How do they learn? What is wired in their brain um, in terms of how they receive information, how they interpret the information, and what they do with it. So we want to kind of break it down in a sense where we can understand the individual and then develop a plan for them to gain an understanding of a specific topic. So differentiation is catering to the students based on their needs, right? So we want to do that. Now, old school, old school schooling, um, maybe the past 20, 30 years or before that was very traditional in the sense where students had to basically adapt to whatever traditional method the teacher was teaching. So if we were looking at multiplication as a concept, third grade, fourth grade, the standard would be just to sit there and memorize as much of the times table as we possibly can, do the standard computations for that, and then move on to more rigorous concepts. But that didn't work for everybody, and we know that as a fact. And from a young age, students might be inclined to not like math, for example, using this as an example as multiplication. They might not be inclined, and they might grow a dissatisfaction with it, therefore creating this never-ending hate for math, and then convincing themselves as they grow older that math is not their subject. all because they just didn't comprehend or they didn't do well with a traditional method. So differentiation wants to avoid those scenarios. So what I have here is a concept of a mental allergy. Now, I hope I'm not copywriting anybody. I didn't really research it. I kind of made up this concept. So a mental allergy, this is what comes to mind when I think of differentiation. The same way that we have, as human beings, we have food allergies and things that we can tolerate and things that we can't tolerate. We should look at instruction and differentiation with the same lens, as in there's some concepts and some methods that students are not going to understand if you give it to them a certain way. So you don't want to feed them information through that route. You want to give them something else. So, it just doesn't make any sense to give somebody something over and over and over, and then they just can't grasp the concept in the method that you're giving it to them. So the idea of differentiation is to feed them through a different channel, right? And something they're not what I'm calling mentally allergic to. So somebody who's a visual learner, but may lack in one of the other intelligences, you want to just focus and kind of like, hone in on that visual strength, and then give lessons and give instruction and hope that the strength of the visual the strength of the visual learner is going to allow them to grasp the concept. So if you're an educator, you definitely have seen this before, the multiple intelligences theory. This is something that me starting my profession in education, I've seen this over the past maybe 7 to 8 years, even through my undergrad. And there's a lot of truth to this theory in terms of every individual is different, and what they prefer and what's easier for them is probably the best route to go if you want them to understand a concept. So we have the different ones over here. Obviously, you guys can see it and you can read it, and you probably have some experience with this as well. Moving on. So now I'm giving you an example of differentiation. So let's say me as a history teacher covering the concept of nuclear warfare or World War II, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is one example I would give my class, or a student in particular who is more of a visual or spatial learner. So they have an idea of a three-dimensional world. They have an idea of their surroundings. They can interpret visual information well. And in this sense, this is a model of what would happen if, God forbid, New York City was nuked by one of the bombs that were dropped in World War II. So this would also resonate with them well, because their residency is right outside Newark, New Jersey, in an area called East Orange. So they'll see, obviously, wow, a nuke in New York will have this effect, that effect, and it'll pretty much cover the entire northeastern New Jersey and southeastern New York, including Long Island. So this would be a perfect example of me demonstrating a lesson to them in a manner that they might accept easier. Here's another example of differentiation if I was dealing with a student that has an aptitude in the logical and mathematical skill. So here would be a graph that pretty much gives us the casualty rates from, with the distances, and in terms of the percentage, in terms of the bomb being dropped on Hiroshima in World War II. So they would be able to analyze this map. Here I see some numbers, and then this graph, not this map. And they'll be able to interpret information, and this might be beneficial for them, for the students that have a logical and mathematical skill set. Moving on. So the final thoughts in terms of differentiation are that you have to provide alternatives. You have to look at your classroom as a classroom of multiple minds that are all wired differently and that have their own intelligences, skills, and preferences. So you want to make those activities catered to the students. So you want to cater to the strengths of them in order for them to grasp an understanding of a concept. And then on the bottom, I pulled this excerpt out of one of the articles that I was reading that says, not all students are alike. Based on this knowledge, differentiated instruction applies an approach to teaching and learning so that students have multiple options for taking in information and making sense of ideas. Right? Going back to how things were in the past, I was born in 1990, so I went through the school system in the early 90s and the early 2000s, and we didn't see too much differentiation at that during that time. It was kind of like you either got something or you didn't. Now, it could have been just the old school methods of teaching that the teachers were providing, or maybe a lack of a refusal to kind of implement new ideas. So I don't know. In the past, if we're going to look at this in retrospect, maybe some students would have gained a lot more knowledge or would have been more encouraged, more engaged, or would have benefited more had the teacher given them different opportunities using differentiation. So it's important that we don't lose sight of that idea. Moving on. So now we have engagement, which is one of the biggest parts of any educator's journey. The one thing that supervisors and principals and administrators look for when they walk into a classroom is the level of engagement. And this is one of the biggest signs of a successful classroom. So engagement is the connection between the students and the learning. Are these students tuned in? Are they attentive? Are they responding? Are they doing what's being told? Are they completing tasks? Are they asking questions, answering questions? This is like the evidence that supervisors, administrators, principals, all that look for whenever they evaluate a teacher and their teacher's performance. So aside from that perspective of getting a good evaluation, this is really what a teacher should strive for. An engaged classroom is a classroom that makes the teacher feel like they're doing their job and they're doing their job well and that their job means something. So it's very important that we invest in making sure our classrooms are engaged. We want our students to be invested in it, and we want to be able to show anybody and to show ourselves mainly that our classroom is a classroom that is a two-way street, and it's not just a teacher splurting information and students either choosing to absorb it or completely dismissing it. So this is just an image of what a disengaged classroom looks like. And unfortunately, almost everybody had experienced one time in their lives, I guarantee it, a disengaged setting, particularly in maybe high school or something. Maybe it's just the way teenagers act sometimes, but a lot has to do with the teacher and the teacher style. So if a teacher's style is very bland and the information isn't relevant, it's not something that the students see as important, then they're going to have a very hard time getting the students to respond and to be engaged. All right, so here's some strategies and some things that'll help with classroom engagement. One thing that's very important is to know your students. You have to take the time to understand the population that you're dealing with, right? Because you don't want to come to them with a very, very obsolete experience in your life that they can't relate to. Therefore, they're just going to not, whatever message you have with them is just not going to resonate. So it's important that teachers do their research on their students, and doing that will allow them to build a foundation for having an engaging classroom. So I put an excerpt here. You bring a ball to the athletes, video games to the gamers, stories to the readers, and gadgets to the crafty. A teacher has to be very versatile and like an octopus almost, and has to tap into students' likenesses, what they enjoy, their hobbies, what kind of conversations they like to have, and things of that sort. So you can be, you can reach as many kids as possible and kind of secure that classroom engagement experience. So another strategy you can do, obviously, is to make the learning process fun. You can turn things into a game, into a competition, and just be a little careful with the type of competitions you do. You don't want it too specific of a skill base. that some students that have no experience with a certain thing would be discouraged to participate. One of the other strategies for engagement is you adding either humor or relevance. Humor is a big hit, especially with younger students. If they can see that their teacher is someone who can lighten up, can kind of make learning fun, can crack a joke every here or then to get students' attention, can be like really down to earth, they will respond well and they will be more engaged. They won't resent you. They'll actually see you as somebody who has entered their environment, because obviously, kids want to have fun. Even adults want to have fun, and the message, whatever message you're conveying, will resonate with them a lot better. Relevance is key. If you understand a kid's environment, if you understand anyone's environment, you understand what they're going through, what they experience, even though you don't experience it yourself, as long as you have an understanding and you can kind of relate or put yourself in a person's shoes, then you're also going to be more inclined to have a classroom that's going to be engaged with you. So if your experiences are way off, totally off, then it's not going to sit well. And I remember this distinctly in high school, where we would have some math teachers or science teachers that would be, immigrant individuals, and obviously there's nothing wrong with them, but the students wouldn't really connect with them that well, because there's a language barrier sometimes. The experiences are completely different. Their style of teaching is more stern, more cut to the chase. They don't leave any wiggle room for just the giggles and reality and life experiences. And then there's a big disconnect, and now you have a classroom that's not engaged at all. So it's very important that you try to find some sort of connection, some sort of relevance with the students, in order to make sure that they engage in the activities they do. And some final thoughts about engagement. You have to almost look at it like a business, your classroom in particular, because you want to ensure that the students are there and they're producing, and also taking in knowledge. You want to make sure that they're getting the most out of their time, because that's a responsibility on a teacher itself, him or herself, excuse me. You want to make sure that they're engaged and that every minute that they're there, they're benefiting in some way, right? And the same way as if you were treating it as a business, you're a manager and you have your workers, you want to make sure they're using every minute of their time to do something productive, right? So any kind of method or idea that a teacher has to increase student engagement, they should just go for it. Just shoot for it, because you'll never know how it'll end up. If it's good, that's great. If it's not, then you learn something new, and should always find different ways to stay connected to the students, because you want that engagement. A lot of teachers get turned off and leave the work field because no matter how hard they teach, the students are just not learning, or the students are just not interested, and that makes it very difficult. And that's very depressing for an individual that puts a lot of time into their lesson plans, into their work. So it's important that we avoid being boring teachers, or teachers that are disconnected with the students. And here are my references for all the information provided. I appreciate your time. Thank you for tuning in. Adios.